Chapter 7. I learned to avoid the witch like scenting an oncoming storm. She swept around the castle, barefoot and brutal, a cloud of poison staining the walls black. The door to her tower remained locked, and she launched out of it at unexpected moments, wood slamming against stone. Her clothes were always black silk, bombazine, crepe and cotton, a confused mixture of modern and ancient. For 3 days straight she wore a flimsy dress with an empire waist that looked so like the gown my grandmother wore in a youthful portrait. I was struck dumb with shock. That ghost arising here, the perfect memory of my grandmother who had died many years since. Was the witch in mourning? I wondered. I dared not ask her. I slept poorly. Wolves came down from the mountains each night to howl a protest beyond the castle walls, and I woke often to check the oil lamp by my bedside had not gone out. In the dark, I felt unmoored, a castaway in the middle of a vast, cruel ocean. In the days, I kept myself to the castle grounds instead. The witch was rarely found too far from her tower. There was a cliff edge falling away to the fast-moving river below, the path winding down the village, a well. When I drew water from it, the water was mineral-stained, spilling over my hands, red like blood, and I recoiled in horror. Whatever was wrong with this place, it had spread its poison. The forest was the strangest arrest, ancient wildwood, untouched by people. Below was a stretch of deciduous beach, above, a conifer forest weaved a deep thicket of branches and needles, so dense that at times I had to walk backwards to force myself through the prickling barriers. Vast tangles of bramble clogged the clearings, snaring my skirts and forcing me to move slow and stalk-like, lifting each foot high before lowering it so slowly to flatten the thorns. And everywhere, wildness. I saw fox and wildcat tracks in the dirt, great badgers' sets, birds' nests, and spider webs, and bark alive with insects, woodpeckers gathered to pick out grubs. Wolf had been right, at least in part. This was a forest too old and alien for me to find my place. But there was so much beauty too. Frost-turning webs to filigree, ragged blooms of fungus on the underside of falling trees, frills of moss like lace. It was a palace, a fairyland, a solitary kingdom I moved through like an awestruck traveller. Tucked in a sunny patch of ground abutting the witch's tower, I discovered the overgrown kitchen garden. At first I thought it was nothing but a weed-strewn patch of ground. Then I recognized the shape of planting beds, a low crumbled wall ringing them, and here and there wild sproutings of herbs that had been tended once. I asked Wolf about it when she brought me my dinner. Not in use for many years, Fräulein. Does no one have the inclination for the work? We can bring up all that's needful from the village. I meant to ask Wolf something more to extend a hand of friendship to the only other person who shared my world, but she left swiftly, keeping her back to me as though I was an ugly sight she didn't want to be reminded of. I let the rejection sting for only a moment, and then I turned my thoughts back to the garden. Of course, it would be a waste of time to tend a whole garden for one person, but the thought of it lying there neglected and unloved was too much. I had my geological study, but I needed something more to give myself a purpose. For now I started with separating the weeds from the remnants of the old garden, making notes of rosemary and basil and mint and thyme. Even there I was ill at ease. I found mugwort and foxglove and other more deadly things planted purposefully alongside the kitchen herbs. I made careful note of where the danger lay. When spring came, I could set about restoring the garden properly, if I lasted here that long. I lived and moved and breathed alone. It was as the witch had ordered. I kept out of her way, skirting the tower like a bruise, and asked no more questions of her. I had never been quite so completely alone, and at the start I didn't know what to make of it. I was afraid of it at the same time as feeling exhilarated. The freedom to wander, unimpeded, with no one ringing the bell for dinner or waiting for me at the breakfast table, had a great pleasure in it. I lived exactly according to my own peculiarities. I tied up my skirts and wore my hair plainly. I ate whatever I felt like and carried apples in my pockets so I could disregard the meals Wolf brought to my room. In the silent evenings, I would sit at my window and take out my mother's drop spindle and the ragged scrap of fleece. No matter how I tried to hook the fleece or how I twisted the strand and the thread always broke, the fibre frayed. I couldn't do what my mother had. She was lost to me in 100 little griefs I found anew each year. Was this the freedom I'd longed for? It was certainly the peace. No Clara chattering inanely every time I tried to read. No stepmother hovering, wondering what I was doing, and if I shouldn't be doing something more improving and less damaging to my eyesight. Not even Wolf gave me any indication of her opinion on me. I felt like in some way I had become the untamed beast in the castle that Blumwald was so frightened of. Wolf was bidden to come feed me 3 times a day like an offering laid at a pagan monument. I roamed wild and uncontrolled, and miserable. No, not at first. Misery was a creeping thing, like the dew settling on grass, or the cold fingers of frost meeting me in my bed at night and crackling the inside of my windows. I had longed to be left alone, to escape the lie of my family, only to discover this was a different kind of poison. Slow acting, but lethal. At first, it numbed me, pleasure leaching from my days like a summer leaf draining of sap to greet the autumn. Then loneliness came, a creeping, oily stain that stopped me from enjoying it at all. I lay sleepless in my bed canopy one night, when I hadn't seen the witch or Wolf or even a servant for 3 whole days, my nails to the soft fleshy insides of my arm. I let them dig in one by one, a sharp bright pain that felt like clarity in a fog, like an answer. It had been, God, how long had I been at the castle? A matter of weeks? And I had unravelled. The potential of newness, a different life, turned brittle and slothed away like rust. Any drive I'd felt, even to find out what happened to the previous companions, dissipated like ash. Perhaps they had suffered as I did, drowning slowly in their own misery, far from the sight of any living thing. A human being was not meant to be totally alone. I understood it now as I had never before. Like a plant needed light, a human needed company. A floorboard creaked outside my door. I froze. The boards creaked again. The pain in my arm fled from my mind. There was something outside my door. Someone. I held my breath and waited for the sound to come, but it didn't. There was a spatter of rain against the window, the sound of wind in the chimney. Nothing more. Had I dreamt it? The longer I listened and heard nothing, the more I began to doubt myself. It could have been anything. The castle was strange enough, I knew that. And who could be outside my door? My arm throbbed, and I felt suddenly foolish and ashamed of resorting to my childish violence against myself. I didn't need to invent horrors in the night. My life was enough of a horror already. The next morning I made sure the oil lamp of my bed was freshly filled, its wick trimmed and glass wiped free of soot. Still, sleep abandoned me. The nights were dark and slow like tar. It was a human offering thrown into a peat bog to drown by degrees. I stumbled through my days, clumsy and stifling my yawns, and found myself looking for faces everywhere, straining to hear voices. More often than not, there were none. The reed lights smoked where no servants trimmed the wicks, cobwebs fanned over door frames unswept. In the great echoing halls and dead spaces, time flowed so slowly that I began to lose track of myself. Some days I could read a whole book and come out to find the sun in the exact same place in the sky. Other times I would wind around a loop or two of staircase to climb a floor, and suddenly half the day was gone. The clocks, few that there were, told different times in their different places. I thought I'd explored the castle thoroughly in my first week, but still found myself walking down corridors that led to somewhere I hadn't expected. I mistrusted my own mind. Perhaps Half a week after I thought I heard something outside my room, I took what I thought was the route from my bedroom to a room of books, uncut direct from the binders, but found myself in a corridor I didn't recognize. Through an arrow slit by the spiral stairs, I could see I was on the far east side, in the lower half of the castle that overlooked the sheer drop to the river. My rooms were above, and the witch's quarters by the tower were in the west wing, near the mountainside. I opened a door at random. It was only a door, a human-sized, plain wooden door, like all the others I'd encountered. It opened into the witch's study. I stepped back and shut it, blinking. I had seen strange things, but this was impossible. Had my mind slipped so far from sanity? I opened it again, but the room was still there. Colors muted with early morning light. It was warmer than the corridor I stood in. A fire stoked at the other end of the study. I touched the side table within reach, sliding my fingertips over the polished grain of the wood. It was real, which meant it wasn't impossible. The sign of a rational mind was to change one's belief in what was possible when presented with evidence. Evolution was impossible until we saw evidence in fossils. It wasn't possible that the earth was more than 6,000 years, as the Bible taught, until the study of rock told us otherwise. I hesitated on a threshold. The witch said she would know if I pried. The back of my neck prickled. Was she watching me now? I knew to go through this door would be to cross a line, but in that moment my fear of the witch was eclipsed by my curiosity. I stepped inside. It was quiet. Softly a clock ticked, and somewhere outside the window trilled a woodlark. In this room it was early morning, the day just easing into motion. In the castle I'd left behind, it was some time after lunch. I walked around the room once, finding details in the scrollwork or wallpaper I couldn't have dreamed up. On the witch's desk was the scatter of papers I'd seen before. With the tip of a finger I lifted a few sheets of handwriting. There seemed to be two hands, one in current, the fluid hand I had been taught by my governess, the other in black letter, a square and sharp-edged Gothic script I had only seen in old Schwarzstein legal documents. Most of the desk was taken up by several stout ledgers, all opened to the pages tightly filled with columns of numbers and dates that struck me as odd. They bore no resemblance to my father's account books. What could the witch be recording so diligently? There was an unfinished letter in the one clear space, dated Tuesday last. Curious. Had it been left unfinished so long? No, the pen that lay beside it was still charged with ink. That this room occupied a different pocket of time and space to the rest of the castle I'd already grasped, but I had not thought it might occupy an entirely different day. Before I could start reading, a voice came from beyond the main door. The witch. She barked an order, I presumed at Wolf. Then the doorknob turned. I shot back across the room and pulled my door shut just as the witch entered. For a breathless moment I stood on the other side, palm flat against the wood. Did she see me? Would she follow? I didn't dare open the door again to check. Nothing happened. I had escaped unnoticed. But now everything had changed. I knew I wasn't losing my mind. And I knew my sneering mistress truly was what everyone had accused her of being. A witch. As my maddening, solitary day passed, I stopped avoiding the witch. I was drawn to her like a drowning woman grasping at another body. I was sinking, and I didn't care if I dragged her down with me. If I heard her down a corridor, I stood my ground and waited for her to pass, savouring her disdainful sneer or irritation. Even her rage failed to move me. I was a tree in a storm, lashed by wind and pelted with rain, but it only nourished. The less I avoided her that following week, the more I noticed her. At a window watching me as I walked in the yard, in the shadows of the great hall as I made drawings of the ragged tapestries, always watching me. For someone who had insisted so forcefully to detest my presence, She sought it out just as much as I. I risked visiting her study through the secret door at least once a day, and each time it spilled me out into that same Tuesday morning, wet ink and dawning sunrise. I only stayed a moment or two to confirm it truly was what it seemed. A scientific experiment repeating the same action under different circumstances to elucidate the forces at work. I had discovered something far beyond anything I would have expected, but I had no one to ask about it, no books to consult, no theories to assess. As in all things now, I was alone. So instead, I took to waiting outside the door to the tower in which she was so often cloistered, to ambush her with suggestions to tidy the place up, send the tapestries in the great hall to be cleaned, fix the broken windows, sweep the blocked chimneys. She stormed past with a glare, or snarled at me to stop cluttering her hallways like litter. This only encouraged me. I took to complimenting her hair, asking after her night's sleep, tagging along behind her to ask about the history of the castle and the local geography and whatever else was at the top of my mind. Did you know that the oldest spiral staircase still standing is in Trajan's column in Rome? I said, following her down a set of steps. It's nearly 2,000 years old, but the Old Testament possibly mentions spiral staircases in the Temple of Solomon, so they could be even 3,000 years old as an architectural feature. She stared at me, haggard, deep bruises under her eyes from lack of sleep. Why are you saying this? What is wrong with you? I smiled to hide the pang of hurt. I think my family had the same question. If I knew how to be whatever it is you all want from me, I would, but I don't. Try harder. I turned into her own personal demon, haunting her doggedly until she started peering round corners or pelting out of her study door to avoid me. I was so lonely, even these fleeting encounters were better than nothing, and the fact that it bothered her so clearly pleased me. I might not be wanted, but at least she couldn't overlook me. A storm blew in by the end of the week, trapping me indoors. I paced outside the normal entrance to the witch's study, wondering if I had annoyed her so much she wouldn't come out while I was there, when the door banged open and the witch appeared. Or rather, a stack of books higher than her head appeared. The stack dipped to get under the lintel, but not enough. The top tome was dislodged, and the curse came from somewhere behind. I caught the book, an edition of Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther. So old the spine was brittle and loose, steadying her and placing it back on top. Her waist was hot under my hand. She emerged, hair tangled and falling in her eyes, cheeks hollow. I waited for her to snap at me for breathing too loudly. Instead, reluctantly, she said, "Thank you." My face blazed hot immediately, and I said a quick, "You're welcome." She lingered, lips parted so I could see a flash of white teeth and red mouth, and looked at me as though she would say something more. Then she barged past me, stepping on my foot. I held the hand that had touched her to my chest. It had been nothing, but that sliver of contact lit a flame in me that burned for hours after. When the storm finally passed, I did as I'd always done when I felt alone and sinking. I walked. The forest might be strange and ancient and unwelcoming, but to walk amongst the trees, feel my thighs and lungs burn, my cheeks redden from wind, and my feet blister, I felt at home in some small way. I had lost my early caution the longer I spent completely alone. I was no longer afraid for my safety, as I set little store by it. I had more to fear in the witch than I did from the trees and wildlife. The forest in winter was beautiful. Bare branches wove and swayed together, as brittle as hay and heavy as stone. The ice groaned and cracked under its ancient weight, and sharp flinty air sliced my throat. Dim light fell fractal, and a half-world between the death of winter and the waiting spring seeded within it. I left early one morning, lunch packed in a knapsack and the block of sugar cake in my pocket, and started walking. While the clear weather held, I wanted to scale far enough up the mountain to get a view of the castle in its setting. The horizon had been confined to walls and ceilings for too long. I needed an ocean of sky above me. The weather turned halfway there. I had begun to lose my grip upon the passage of time, but I thought we must be where November slipped into December, and winter truly claimed us. Clouds rolled up the valley, grey and heavy with snow. Frustration bit. Finally I had felt the stretch in my limbs, the weight of loneliness lifting off me, but it was not to be. I turned for home, but soon enough I lost my way. The sky grew darker. A mind-slowing cold began to build, and I became clumsy as my toes numbed in my boots. I walked and walked, but still the castle didn't appear. Had I gone too far? I didn't know the landmarks of this forest yet, and it would be all too easy for me not to recognize home. The first few flakes of snow fell lightly, but its gentleness didn't last. Soon, great handfuls shuddered down between the bare treetops, no canopy to stop them. I picked up speed and regretted it a moment later when my foot caught in a root and I plunged into the leaf mulch. The shock made me lose myself for a moment, then come back in spikes of pain, barked shins and palms, rude bruised rib. My ankle flared so bright I thought I would throw up. A sprain, and a nasty one at that. I had fallen enough times before to have twisted my ankle more than once, but never like this, and never so far from help. Using the trunk of springy young elm, I tried to stand, but my ankle was a white hot point of agony with even the slightest weight. I found a stout stick to help me hobble into the lee of an oak. My mother had often been afraid when I went walking in the snow. She told me stories of woodcutters who had frozen to death minutes from their warm hearts, lost in the fury of a blizzard. She had been too afraid to go with me, too afraid to leave the bedroom half the days, snow or sun. Turned inwards, wrapped in a shawl amongst ripe sheets and scattered books. She had been so easily overwhelmed by the world, and so unable to escape her own sadness. I thought of her now, her heart-shaped face and glittering blue eyes as she told me of frostbite, of falling asleep to be buried alive in snow. The snow came down harder and harder, making my fingers clumsy as I pulled my cloak closer. Threads gathered all around, in the snow and the dark and the pain. This was a mistake. I wouldn't survive. The snow settled and the cold came biting. I tried to keep moving as best as I could to maintain my body heat, hobbling from tree to tree, but I knew it was pointless. I was too far from the castle. Already the light was fading as the short winter day lapsed into night. I found another tree to shelter under and dug myself into its roots, packing leaf mulch and snow around me. Anything to keep warm. At least the cold had numbed the pain in my ankle. I couldn't sleep, not if I ever wanted to wake up again. The twilight forest provided more than enough distraction in snuffling rodents and flitting moths, boughs groaning under their weight, and all around me the deathly fall of snow. I ate the crumbs of the sugar cake and let a little ice melt in my mouth. Then the soft crunch of footfall muffled. My breath caught. There it came again, the sound of something moving closer. I held perfectly still. A bear? Rare, but possible. A wolf, most likely, but it wouldn't come alone. No option heralded my pleasant future. Wolves didn't hunt people, I reminded myself. That was a fairy tale. They were far more interested in deer and rabbits and other easy prey. But too many myths had come true for me. I lived with the witch in a castle where magic was real. And right now, I was easy prey. A shape separated itself from the trees, and I screwed my eyes shut. I'm small and quiet and nothing. I'm not here. You will not see me. The crunch of footfalls so close I could feel the snow shifting, warm breath on my cheek. You're terrible, Tiding. My eyes flew open. The witch crouched in front of me, pale face frowning. A shadow made flesh. Black dress, black cloak, black hair streaming behind her, and gems studded with snowflakes. I blinked in drowsy confusion. A hallucination? Had I fallen asleep and was dreaming? I reached out a numb finger and traced the plane of her porcelain cheek. Real. It's you, I broke into a delirious smile. I'm terrible at lots of things. I see, the cold has addled your mind no further than before. I looked at her bare feet, almost as pale as the snow. Aren't you freezing? Her lip curled. Am I not a witch? It was no sort of an answer at all, but then she hooked an arm under my shoulders and hauled me up. Unthinking, I let my weight fall on my bad ankle and cried out. I cannot carry you, she said. After a moment, with my eyes closed to let the nausea and pain wash back like the tide pulling out, I said, I can manage. The witch led us to the feet of a fallen oak, its trunk the height of a woodsman cottage. When it fell, the root ball had ripped out of the earth. A tangle of grasping arms knotted and frozen in the air, and beneath it was a tree cave, a temporary hollow with a rude roof waiting for us. The witch lowered me in, then made quick work of stacking branches around the hole to create a wall, packing it tight with snow. Night had almost swallowed us, and in the shelter it was darker still. Already I felt a little warmer. The witch crawled in beside me and closed up the gap with more branches and snow until we were sealed in like babes in a room. It was close quarters, so close I could feel the jig and jostle of her elbow as she worked. Her bare foot rocked up against my calf, and her skirts draped across my knees. My initial happiness at seeing her had faded, and now I realized the situation I was in. The witch had found me, which meant she had been looking, out in the dark and cold, for someone she despised so much she had ordered me out of her way. I had thought to make a nuisance of myself, but not like this. In the dark she was little more than shifting body weight, the rustle of skirts and those glittering black eyes like beetles. I held my breath, waiting to see what was going to happen. She slumped beside me, the line of her arm hot against mine, heavy and human. Only her bare feet stood out, eyes pale flashes in the darkness. How she survived the cold I didn't understand, but there was very little about her I did understand, so I left that thought along with all the other impossible things. Something brushed against my fingers. At first I thought it was a spider, something long and sinuous. Then I realized it was just her hand, falling limp at her side. How did you find me? I whispered. I didn't think you'd notice me gone. No response, only the shallow rise and fall of breath. Then those eyes, flint sparks in the darkness. I notice you. I swallowed, mouth suddenly dry. A thread of tension drew taut between us. I felt every mote of air and the gap between our bodies, the radiating heat of her, the weight and shape of her so close we breathed the same air. I flushed and turned away first. The witch threw her cloak around us. It's a freezing night. We must share our warmth, or you may not survive. Her arm snaked around my waist and tucked me against her, and I could hardly make my thoughts line up with any sense. The soft swell of her breasts pressed against my back. The line of her thigh matched up with mine. I became more acutely aware of my body than I'd ever been in my life. She hated me so thoroughly, found every moment of my company unbearable, every glance met with contempt, and yet she saved me. I couldn't understand it. Tentatively, I let my hand fall over hers, cold fingers slotting together. She had bound us together that night in my father's study. To what end? I didn't know.